This is The Audience Connection, the podcast where we go into what content actually connects and into why it sticks.
Sponsored by Casual, where behavioral science meets storytelling to build trust for your audiences.
We're your hosts. I'm Olly Atkinson.
And I'm Lydia Chan. All right, everyone, welcome back to The Audience Connection. Well, today you've got me and Olly. We're talking about Adfest 2026. Olly, you just came back from what looked to be like a really cool conference in Thailand, and you gave a talk there. So would love to share that with the audience.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to go over there, and we were talking. The talk was called "Making People Care: Storytelling in the Age of AI," and really the core idea behind the talk is we are absolutely overwhelmed with content now, and there's been this idea that you just need to produce more and more and more, but actually you need to produce more resonant, more immersive content, and we'll come on to kind of talk about what that means to really connect with your audience on a subconscious level and make work that feels like it's made for them. And that will actually drive sales, behavior change, charity donations, everything you're trying to achieve. You kind of need to think about it in a different way. And we put live trackers on the audience. So we had 50 people in the audience that were wearing trackers, and we were measuring their brains live during the experience. So, and all the tech worked, which was an absolute, delight really, because then we got the live measurements on the screen and everyone really leaned in. So yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah, this is why we're not in live event production, because those things can go wrong real quick. No, I think that's really cool, right? And I think it's really cool to put to test some of the principles that we've been sharing on the show, and really put live testing for immersion. So I guess just for the audience, if they missed this episode with Paul Zach, talk a little bit about like immersion, right? Like how is that different from traditional metrics like views or likes and comments and things like that?
Yeah, it's a bit of it's a combination really. So, and I want to do Paul Zach justice here. So if you want to really kind of deep dive on immersion, you should go back and listen to that episode, because obviously Paul can describe it brilliantly. So Paul Zach is the neuroscientist. He's one of the top neuroscientists in the world, and he has developed technology that means you can measure an audience's release of oxytocin and dopamine at the same time, which means that measurement means we can identify when an audience is actually leaning into an experience. And what I mean by that is you're not just watching something, you're actually experiencing it. Your brain is tagging it as an important moment. And that is really key, because all the metrics that we use at the moment are looking at clicks and likes and comments, but it's not telling us whether it's actually connecting on a deeper level, and this technology does that. So yeah, it's interesting, and we went on a bit of a journey with everyone, but the response was fantastic.
Yeah, I hope no one flatlined on you, but it must have been a really riveting talk, and also just like quite nerve-wracking, right? If you sort of see people's immersion as you're giving your presentation, and you're like, oh no, I gotta do a song and dance now because the immersion has dropped.
Like when I told my friends that I was going to measure people's immersion live as I was giving the talk, they were like, are you mad? This is insane. You shouldn't be doing this. It's just like a suicide mission. But it was because we were showing films, we had this kind of like, we could see the peaks going up, and then we went live towards the end of the session. And this was a tip from Paul. He said, you just get the live tracker up on screen, and then we got everybody to turn and just look at the person next to them in the eyes for 5 seconds. Now, oxytocin is a care hormone, and it's through connection, through human connection, that you actually, feel this rising. So it's not just good content; it's actually a hug or a moment where you're experiencing connection with another human being. That spikes it. And so we did this very simple test where everyone turned and looked at each other in the eyes for 5 seconds, and it was flatlining. We were down below the immersion level. I was like, oh my god, this hasn't worked. And all of a sudden, we saw this massive uptick, and everyone went up to 90, and it was that was a real moment.
That's actually interesting, right? Because I guess then it shows like that there is this maybe awkward moment in interactions, or like I guess like a bit of a pause before you really kind of connect with either someone or a piece of content, and then it just shoots right up once it sort of I guess hits you internally.
Yes, yeah. The amazing thing about it is you can then map um, how immersed people are across a film or an event, or it can be mapped across all kinds of things, really. But the way we're using it is to map it across a film. And what we did, we showed one of our old films. There was an award-winning film. It did brilliantly, but when you look at the immersion data on it, the first 30 seconds are really stimulating people on a subconscious level. People are like, there's a question opened at the beginning. So in behavior science, there's a thing called the curiosity gap, where you open a question and the brain really wants to resolve it. And that film that we showed has that at the start. But then there's about a minute of messaging at the end.
Mm.
And you just see the immersion level just drop and then flatline. And so what that gives us is a map to how we can produce something that's really, really effective. And the rule really for immersive content is hit me hard, hit me fast, and let me go. And I think we're going to start to see our work being more like that, because that's going to drive behavior change ultimately.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, I think about that, and it makes me think about more long form storytelling, right? So, this particular example, guys, we'll share it in the show notes, so you can see what we're talking about. Is a really creative piece, very like sound design driven. But then, as Ollie just mentioned, there was a lot of corporate messaging jammed almost after the creative parts, right? And
Yeah.
that's where you see the immersion drop, and you wonder when an audience experiences that, are they going to remember that messaging, right? Where the immersion dropped? Are they going to have good brand recall and good brand sentiment, or they're just going to remember, hey, this was like a cool piece. At the beginning, it was really like engaging sound design. It grabbed me. Oh wait, but I forgot. I don't know what the brand was, right? Or I don't know who is sending this message. Maybe, right?
No,
I
complete. No,
wonder if
you're
that's the
absolutely
case.
right. Yeah, yeah, you're bang on. Like that's exactly. Paul talks about that in the episode. If you essentially, if you've got the most immersive moment, you want your brand to appear at that moment. So that's really key. And as you say, yeah, we'll share the episode in the show notes. But there are these Foley artists, and there's a cinema screen behind them, and really you need the logo to appear behind the Foley artist as the reveal is happening, and the brain's going, oh, that's quite nice. You're resolving the question. That's the moment you want to see that appear. Yeah, so it's. I think the resonance side of it is also really important as well. So, once you've got the immersion, is that's how you make people care. But we have this thing in our head called the reticular activating system, which is essentially like a massive ad blocker in our heads. And that means we filter out anything that's not relevant to us. And it doesn't matter whether it's on the right platform or it's been done in, all these different creative ways. You're kind of guessing if you're not using these ways to try and kind of get through into people's brains. So if you think of the reticular activating system as a kind of bouncer, and it's not letting anything that doesn't feel relevant to you in, well, resonance is the tool that gets you past that bouncer. And then once you're in, then immersion makes you actually care about what you're talking about. So yeah, it's there are very useful case studies in there as well. We talked about a whiskey case study where they used what this Chris Demetrakos refers to as Gen 2 metrics, right? So that, again, that's like personas and dashboards, and what we would all typically still use today to identify who our audience are. And this whiskey brand thought all of their audience were men and outgoing and social. And so all of their ads were like this. But then they focused on their cognitive profile, and that's through a mnemonic called Ocean, which is openness, conscientiousness, extrovert, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And when they kind of measured them by this and then looked at the category markers through this platform that Chris created, they understood that 30% of them were women, and a really high number of them were introverted as well. And so this kind of outgoing social ad that they'd been using was just being filtered out, right? Think about that mental ad blocker again. It just doesn't go in. And now they understand that their audience are introverted. They do a really intimate, quieter, creative, and that's got a whiskey, but it's got a cat and a woman at home reading a book. And when they used that creative, it meant like the story felt like it belonged to that audience. It felt recognizable. And that meant they had a 56% hike in revenue with no media spend behind it after 3 months, after 5 years of flatlining previously using these old metrics. So it's quite groundbreaking stuff. Now, the really challenging thing about it, I think, is people struggle. And one of the neuroscientists we're going to be interviewing in this season talked about people struggle to change their mental underwear. You can't see or feel immersion. It's happening in your subconscious. And so I think we need to get to this kind of point where we're starting to use the science and the creativity at the same time. So we're understanding what's connecting with people on a biological level, and then using our creativity to make sure we're kind of hitting that conscious mind as well.
Well, let's get back to this live experiment that you did. What would you say were the moments that really drove peak attention in your talk, right? Because I think a lot of our audience members, maybe they are public speakers as well, right? And they do events and things like that. So yeah, were there moments that you saw that really drove immersion? And then also where, moments where it just felt really flat and was kind of surprising to you, right? It's like, oh, this maybe wasn't as engaging as I thought it would be in the talk.
Actually, Jay, our Chief Commercial and Creative Officer over in APAC, he posted the entire talk his immersion track on LinkedIn. And so it was interesting having a look at that, because the beginning is a little bit like lower down, as you might expect. And then you get kind of these peaks of immersion. We did show 2 films, and that was the interesting one by us, where we kind of looked at the immersion in the first 30 seconds and then the flatlining because of the messaging. And then there's another piece from Paul's work that there's a Super Bowl ad from 2018 for Diet Coke. And we showed that, and that had a massive immersion reading. And that's because there's certain things that really peak immersion. So participation is one of them. So that's why, because people were taking part, I was asking them questions, I was getting that participation from the audience. People remember that, and it makes their brain engage on a subconscious level. So that's one thing that really does help. And then a narrative arc, classic narrative arc, really supports an immersive film or whatever. If you've got that great characters, a rising tension being disrupted, and then a resolution, that's really strong. So when you talk there about long form content and good storytelling, it doesn't have to be, if it's hit me fast, hit me hard, let me go, that's fine for a short ad. But good storytelling, that's why we love films. That's immersion, and there's peaks of immersion that you then kind of get immersed, and then you come out of it, but then you get immersed again. But that story arc is so memorable because it's immersive. And then novelty. This is why this Diet Coke one was very immersive. We are drawn to things that are quite novel. So we're genetically programmed from birth to seek novelty and safety. And so this one that we showed was slightly asymmetrically filmed. It's got bright yellow walls. It's got this very tall Australian model doing this strange dance. And everyone's just a bit like, what is going on here? And that had a really strong immersion reading. So yeah, I think when you look at the entire talk, the ending was really strong. And that's something I was really pleased about, because we didn't really have any films at the end. We did watch a Panda Express film that I thought would be very immersive for that audience and very resonant for that audience. And so we had a really big uptick, I think, at the end. But that wasn't just the film. I think the talk seemed to click with everybody at the end, and people were enjoying it. And so, and for me, that's really exciting, because Daniel Kahneman talked about the peak end rule, right? You only remember the peak of an experience and the end of an experience. Mm-hmm. And so to have strong immersion right at the end, I was delighted with that, because it means that people are going to go away remembering the talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they'll come up to you and ask for your autograph or your contact information and everything. So Olly, I mean, I guess to maybe have some like key practical takeaways, and I know you just sort of went through these, but in summary, we're talking about how do you actually build immersion without having to test it, right? Like I think that we can't test every film. We can't strap, watches to 35 people plus, right, for every single piece of content that's being created. And also budgets don't necessarily allow for it, but also the speed to market too, right? Like we are being pushed to create content so fast nowadays. So how do we either collectively have this aggregate sort of learnings and apply it to the content that's being created? But also, be able to somehow test content that needs to be delivered tomorrow.
Yeah. So we gave a framework for people to take away in the session. And if you're thinking about producing a project, think about where does it become human? That's what we're engaging with here. That's these hormones are appearing because we're connecting with people. And so where does it become human? If you're just using stock footage and it's cutting between lots of different scenes and it's feeling quite abstract, you might not get a very good immersion reading from that. Or if you've just got lots of signs coming up, it's probably going to get filtered out. So where does it become human is an important one. Where is the turn? What's the question that you're asking, essentially? And so the moment that you want your piece of work to flip and go, so what's the question you're asking? And then where does the turn? When does the penny drop in the piece? That's really important to protect that. And talking about protecting is like, are you protecting the peak and the end? We talked about that just a second ago, and that's really important to protect that. And then what's the behavior change that you want at the end of it? So thinking ultimately, what are you trying to get people to do? And then you kind of work back from that.
Yeah. Well, great rules to incorporate into your content creation. We'll kind of end it there. Thanks for sharing your experience with everyone, Olly. And
No worries.
We'll catch you all next time.
If this episode sparked something, curiosity, a new way of thinking, or something you're going to take back to the team, we'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. Make sure you're subscribed, leave us a rating, and drop us a comment. Tell us what stuck and what you want us to explore next. We want to know.
This is The Audience Connection, sponsored by Casual, the video partner for global brands trying to build trust with their audiences. We'll see you next time.